I'm Caitlin Cadieux, an animator and illustrator.
And I'm Ira Marcks. I write and I draw comics. And this is a podcast about the mysterious and magical process of bringing cartoon stories to life.
And welcome to this very special episode of Cartoon Feelings.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Before we get into what those feelings are all about, just here's a couple friendly reminders for all of y'all out there. You can write to us at cartoonfeelingspodcast@gmail.com. And if you've got a nice review in mind and you've been waiting to share it, now's a great time. You can go over to Apple Podcasts and give us some 5 stars and say a little thing or two. We had a friend, I saw a review the other day. It was from Jessica somebody, and she said, we're like her friends that she hangs out with.
Wow.
I could read it exactly word for word, but it was pretty much that. And
Thank
that's
you,
nice.
Jessica something.
Yeah.
Friend, personal friend that we know.
Yeah. So she knows who she is, I think. Anyway, so reviews are nice, and we'll probably talk about them in exactly that fashion if you leave one. And if you want even more of this stuff, we've got a little Patreon going, Cartoon Feelings, and there's a couple bonus episodes up there right now. We're building a little fun bag for you.
Oh, yeah.
Audio.
A fun little, like when you get to pick a toy at the end of the dentist. They don't do that, do they? Anyway, it's like that.
Yeah.
It's like a free toy
so
that you pay for.
It's very confusing. So and also just in general, if you want to support the show, Patreon is the way to do that. And all right, that's all I have to say.
Also,
about
my
that
Cash
stuff.
App is in today's episode, we're doing a thing where I'm kind of winging it, and it was my idea, finally. TM, my idea. Do not steal. I'm here to talk to Ira about how do you, one such as you, or myself even, make a graphic novel.
Oh.
Ever heard of them?
Yeah, luckily. Otherwise, this would be either a really short episode or a really long, confusing.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, because then I'd be
one.
like, we've talked about them.
Yeah. So, so I actually have no idea what we're going. I mean, I have a general idea what we might talk about, but this is really all on you. This is a kind of totally different type of episode.
Let me savor it a little bit. I'm not used to having the power.
Oh, well, you can have it whenever you want.
Wow. Well, then it's like, it doesn't count.
Yeah. You
don't know anything about this. All right. Cool. So I've written up a little document of notes. As I've told you before, spoiler, it starts with, hi, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point.
Okay. Could I ask you a question real quick at the top?
Yes.
I just want, let's say you're a listener that's like, I'm in exactly this position where maybe I want to do this too. Like, do you want to are you going to give a little background about why you want to ask these questions?
Perhaps. Okay. Yes, because I do feel like I need to own this from the very top.
Yeah. All right. Good.
So you and I have a rich, storied history of creative stuff, everything for, God, I don't even know how long, a while, years at this point.
Over 5 years
Crazy.
Altogether?
10,000 years.
Yeah.
And I bounced around a lot from different creative projects, working on my full-time job, that kind of a deal. But I've always wanted to do, I thought I wanted to do like indie animation, something like that. Kind of struggled with that for a long time. And then now in the past year or so, I've been thinking about doing, what else? A graphic novel, perhaps. But I don't really know anything about those. I mean, I've read them.
Yeah.
I've seen them. I've leafed through them. I've read yours, talked about it. But I don't really, I think I never thought about it as like, that's a thing I would do.
Yeah.
Which maybe when I was younger, I think there was a possibility for that, where I can totally remember like drawing comics characters and stuff like that. But, probably dabbled in manga as a middle schooler. I almost said preschooler. No. Not then.
You weren't that talented.
Don't think I knew about it.
Very talented.
Then,
Okay,
yeah. It wasn't good. Whatever I did, it was not good. It was bad. But now I'm arriving back at it again.
Yeah.
And now I'd like to know more about it, about how the pictorial sausage is made.
Okay. That is the technical term. We used to call it sequential art, but now it is
Sausage
pictorial
art.
sausage.
That would make a great graphic novel title. That's all I'm saying.
So my take on that is, so basically the way I am looking at it is like, it's like you were missing this one piece of the puzzle that's going to let you set you free onto a project like this, right? It's like you have all the skill set.
Yeah.
But maybe there's a way of looking at it that's missing.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. Yeah.
Because when you say that, like you said, we have a lot of overlap, and I've drawn characters, but I think they've always really been in service of like making a comic of some length. And so I think graphic novels has always been in my head as that's what I do with my skill set. Whereas I guess you were like, well, I can do all these different things with my skill set. And comics just didn't show up that high on that list.
Well, like as a result, it's just there's too many. There's too many things. That's been my problem. Perhaps you can relate, listener, if this is about you.
Well, also me.
And perhaps you can relate.
How many times have I delved into thinking I can do something in After Effects and I spend like 8 months on it and then it gets like 80 views on YouTube? You've probably seen all of them.
Oh, maybe.
But that's me doing the same thing.
It's good though. You do great job.
Oh, thanks.
You're doing it. It's just, it's tough out there.
But it's the same type of, the too many things problem is like.
You want to do everything. Yeah. And then it's, of course, I'm like full-time job. Usually doesn't support whatever I want to do on the side. Mm-hmm. Got some executive dysfunction problems, probably, whatever. Classic stuff that like a lot of creative people can relate to, I think.
Yeah.
And so I think somewhat my circumstances have changed where I'm like, well, maybe I can actually do this for real.
Okay.
So that's like the internal psychological aspect, which is great. More on this as it develops, if it develops. But also, like I really am realizing that I work best with boundaries, like strictures that aren't too encompassing. Mm-hmm. Another sort of like a generic creator statement that I think most people would find to be true. If you have, some, what word am I looking for? Just like things you can't do in a project. It helps you actually make something because you need to figure out how to work around. You have problems you need to solve. Mm-hmm. So I feel good about doing that. I used to try to do animation projects and they're just way too big because you can just like literally imagine it. I'm like being a shitty client, basically being like, make it look amazing. And it's like, you have two hands and joint problems. Like, no, you're not going to do that. So now I'm just trying to scope this. Mm-hmm. And, I've done a lot of, I don't know like how much I could even talk about it on here. Not for like, I don't know, legal reasons or whatever, but just like, there's a lot that's still like going on in here in my mind, but I've done a lot of like story development stuff and thinking about that aspect of things. So really some of it is just like, and now what? Now how do I make this? And so that's like sort of the angle I'm coming at it from, but I'm also asking these questions just sort of in a broader scope of like, how does it work for you? How does it work for the publishing industry?
Yeah.
Whatever, like, larger things that may not apply to someone like me who is not doing that yet. Mm-hmm. And at the end of all of this, like a big asterisk, if I don't end up doing it, nobody contacts me about it. Like in 5 years or whatever, if it didn't happen, shut up. No, it didn't.
Because you know what, listener? We're going to dig up all the things you gave up on and throw them back in your face because we all have exactly the same amount of like abandoned
and it's like
finished projects at all levels, right?
I have to acknowledge, I think, in a way, I don't want to be self-defeating, but it's like there's a graveyard of started unfinished ideas, just like you're saying.
Yeah.
And I don't think this one will be, but I don't know I don't know.
The way I always look at it is like, I mean, this is going to be like the Ira saying lame bumper sticker things because like you're putting me in kind of like
merch
teacher / like inspirational mode.
That's true. Mr. Marcks.
I mean? So here's what I always say. And the way I try to say to myself when I'm being like my, working for the client of Ira is like, there is no dead end really. It's just a journey. Like even if this specific thing doesn't become a final thing, it will iterate probably into something else. Like I was just writing a thing today and as I was writing some dialogue, I'm like, that's the exact same character I wrote in a book that never got finished like 8 years ago. Mm-hmm, like everything bubbles back.
Well, yeah, and like, I don't want to get too much into it. It's a little inside baseball, but there's like a significant portion, at least like cosmically, of the stuff that I want to work on that was born out of something that you and I tried to work on forever ago.
I have that too sometimes with stuff. Like I'll be like, oh yeah, that idea, that's the cool thing about the low stakes type of, these projects can be work, like it can be a job, but it's sort of not a job in a way that you can like be like, oh, I can pull that idea in. Like there's a lot of room for inspiration with a comics project where like, right now for you, there's like zero stakes there's no money on the line. There's no deadline. It's
literally
just like,
nothing bad can happen.
Get it going? Yeah.
Unless I get carpal tunnel.
Oh yeah. But that's a different conversation, I think, right?
So we'll see. I can blame it on my job, get some workman's comp. Maybe cut that. I don't know. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen, but like, I don't mean it.
Yeah.
But if it does, anyway, cool. So
I'm ready.
Excellent. You're gonna love the rest of the questions after this one get good, actually.
Oh.
The first one is, where's story idea come from? Question mark.
Okay. That's really
And
a question.
that's the big idea, so I'm just...
Right.
I do kind of want to hear you actually speak to that, even though I did sort of leave it in as a joke.
I actually kind of have an answer to that. It's
Perfect.
actually quite brief. To me, a story doesn't get completed because the person making it didn't know what they wanted to say with it. So that's my thought on that right off the bat, because I think you can definitely do this. It's just a matter of you figuring out what you want to say with it. Mm-hmm. And that, plot is part of that. Character is a bigger part of that. What the characters do is the biggest part of it. So comics, art form, narrative art, sequential storytelling told over a period of time. The fundamental thing you need to do with the graphic novel is have some characters in a time and place, go through an experience that resolves in a different time and place where they have changed. That's like really all you need to do, right? So
sounds easy.
I think that is a skill you have to build up over time. So when we say graphic novel, I would warn anyone trying to jump into like the doing 100-ish pages thing is like, let's maybe do a scene and see how you manage like emotional stakes of a character in a moment. And like, because I spend a lot of time drawing expressions, like eyebrows, I think is the thing I draw the most. So it makes me realize that the way a character responds in moments, that's like the essential part of the storytelling that makes like a comic good. And when you get yourself in that mindset of like achieving that, that's what makes you want to do the project, is like being in your character's mind. So my question to you is, your story will come from like a scenario or a character or a combination of both that you want to explore. Do you have something like that?
Yes.
Okay.
End of sentence.
All right. So why can you, but you don't feel like it can be a story yet, or you're worried like how you know.
So this is sort of a
begin the
seamless
journey?
segue into my
Okay.
next question, which has 3 subparts. So I'll just rattle off the whole thing because it's sort of meandering. More importantly, after where's story idea come from, how do you get it on the page?
Oh, okay.
Sub question 1, does it start as a screenplay? Section 2, do you thumbnail every page and panel as part of the writing process? 3, do you write a story outline and then just draw from there? These are all just 3 different ways of doing it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I've Googled this. I'll just throw that out there. I saw some cool, graphic novelists talking about how they do stuff. And one of them, I'd never even thought about it this way because it's just not how I think about stuff. But they were like, yeah, you can write it as a screenplay, like literally just screenplay format.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, I mean, that makes perfect sense. It just, like, even though I do animation, it's just like not really how I've worked in stuff.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's just like not really, but it makes sense. So I'm curious, like, how do you do it? Like
Okay.
I will have more nitpicky questions, I think, during this.
Okay, let's start at that bigger. Yeah, because that's a good breakdown of the steps, actually, like kind of in the order you were listing them. So let's look at the bigger idea of like writing it with fingers on a keyboard before we get to the drawing. Because I think for me, and this is also me in this moment. So right now, my books they're like 300-page-ish middle grade mystery story. So I think some of it is the type of story you want to tell. Like if you're telling a mystery, you really need to know like where you're going and how the mechanics of that mystery works, which means, for me at least, that you really have to have it scripted out and you have to know when these beats happen. If you're doing maybe something that's a little more memoirish and you're just recalling memories and you just have these different scenes, you could almost, maybe it might even be against your better judgment to write any of it and maybe just start storyboarding, because it will read best if it's flowing more naturally. Like those are 2 far ends of a spectrum. So first thing you might want to do is like answer for yourself the type of story you're telling. I think that could be important because, and I say all that because I feel like I do a lot of writing and I'm not a great case for like, here's how you should do it, because I've been writing the script for my new book for about 8 months. And I think that's probably way, way too long for a lot of people. But the reason I do it is because I don't want to start drawing and then regret the things I draw. I don't know how you are with drawing, but I don't want to erase. I don't really want to redraw something once it gets to a final stage.
Yeah.
Maybe.
No,
you know
I
what
don't.
I mean?
Yeah. And I like for things to just keep going.
Yeah.
Which is for better or for worse.
Okay. So in that case, let's say you're someone who, once you start drawing, you just want to be in that zone and you want to be drawing. Write your summary, get it from beginning to middle to end as clear as possible, and then even start writing your dialogue, because comics are as much word bubble as they are art, for a lot of them. Again, I'm in a very specific market where like middle grade books are very talky because they kind of play like cartoons that are loud and talky. Whereas like more adult comics, some of them are quieter. But I like to have all my dialogue figured out, and then I'm sort of imagining what my characters are going to do. And then I start storyboarding after that, because I really want to know, I want to have confidence to be able to have like a strong opening and like know my characters really well. And for me, just editing text over and over, writing I'm on the literal 9th or 10th version of like the synopsis with like minute detail changes. And now I'm writing the dialogue. And that's like 8 months of me writing, not drawing anything. But somebody listening might be like, yeah, I do not do that at all. And that is an embarrassing thing to say, Ira. You shouldn't be doing it either.
Why am I listening to this podcast?
Yeah. But do you see like kind of basically you're trying to save yourself time later so you don't get burnt out? Because a graphic novel, even if it's 50 pages, is like more of a marathon. So my advice to summarize is kind of like write up top as much as you need to be confident that you kind of have an idea of where you're going.
Okay.
Does that?
Yeah, that's super interesting. Well, because like I guess I always sort of imagined it just in my fantasy version that people were like, draw, whatever, figure it out. And I'm like, that's way too much work, realistically, when you think about it. I'm sure people do work that way, but just like you were saying, like, I don't want to blow up my whole like page that I sketched or whatever and then do it again. And then, or make like 10 revisions of a story. Yeah. Also the drawn part of it.
Ooh, that's can I ask you a question at this stage, actually, that I think, okay.
You may at any time ask me a question and I'll let you know. Yeah. If it's not cool, I'll be like, I won't be answering that, sir.
My questions will to try to refine. Yeah. No, they won't be specifics about like giving away like story stuff. It's more about like the type of project, because if we can narrow that a bit, I think the answers like might get better and more helpful. Mm-hmm. So do you have an idea, without giving away like anything about your story, where, you know, they say where your story fits on the shelf? Like what age group? Do you know like what genre, or like who's your book going to be for? And
can I answer your question with a question?
Sure.
Because that's another, let me see where I put in my notes. Yeah. Because that confuses me. We talked about it a little bit before, and just like innately it confuses me. I think because I just maybe I shouldn't be saying this in a public forum, but it's like, I don't think about that.
Well, me neither.
For work, I do.
Right. Well,
but like, that's different. Yeah. Like,
but in this case, it's kind of not.
Yeah.
It is work. Yeah. It could be work.
It could be, yeah.
You know?
And I guess that's why, like, to me, it's so personal. And it's like, I just want to do it. Like, I just want to finally have done it and do it. Cause I think my problem, this is so meandering. My problem is like writer's block. Mm-hmm. I think ultimately it's not even just like, can you make the work? It's like, I'm too busy fretting over the content and don't know how to address that. And I think I just realized that like now in this moment. But yeah, like, so I don't know that. That's okay. Know that stuff. And, I have a question in here, or sort of like two questions. It's like, what considerations do you make in terms of the target audience? Like how much of the creative development, what you're working on, is audience driven? Specifically, I do this X, Y, and Z way because I know that this is like a middle grade book. Yeah. Etc.
Well, for art's sake, obviously the answer is like, do what's in your heart and make that.
Perfect. And no further questions.
Yeah, and it will find an audience. But in a more practical sense, if you're going to ask me a question about like, how do you construct a story? It's like, well, if I was making a book for 7-year-olds, I definitely wouldn't script 8 fucking drafts of a thing because I'm talking to a 7-year-old, you know? But if I'm making a book that for middle school that's pushing teen, and I wanted to like speak on novelistic levels of like their subtext, I'm going to write 8 drafts because I want kids to like get really literate with my stuff. So we could say that like, speak to your heart, but the way you construct your story might be change who you're talking to. Like I know you speak to students a lot, like through Adobe or like different venues. Like you wouldn't talk to a high schooler the way you talk to somebody in like grad school. You know what I mean?
Or would I? I think that's a problem. That's some self-reflection.
Well, I do too.
Do I do that?
Yeah. Well, I think we all do, because who could actually understand a market or understand an audience? Like it's all such a gamble.
Yeah.
But you should kind of always think about an audience in some way, because you're trying to tell a story for someone to enjoy. So it might help if you go a little step further and be like, who am I speaking to? Like, imagine somebody reading it. Because I think that will answer questions for your story. Like, if you have a character, like in the past when I was more at the spot where I'm like, I don't have an answer for market or voice or any of these things, my stories ended really obtusely, because to me, that's the type of story I always thought I liked, stories that seem to just open a door into like when Truman on the Truman Show walks out into like nowhere. You're like, I'm like, ooh, I like that weird feeling. But some other people want more resolution. And if you're writing a fucking middle grade book that a publisher wants to put out there, like, well,
I wasn't ready for Truman Show in middle school.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, if your audience might decide like how you begin, end, or story, like how many swear words are you going to use? So those are things that might be helpful, but also they might not be.
Yeah, because I think, like, I'll throw this out to you personally, not in an audience way, and I don't even know if this is accurate or not. I have this vague notion that maybe it would be like, because we talk about this a lot, if it was like Secret of Nim.
Yeah.
What the hell? What is the target audience for that? I don't know. But like that, whatever the target audience is, like that's the type of stuff that I want to make, is that stuff we always talk about that's like fun adventure stuff for kids, but also like kind of fucked up.
Right. Yeah.
I know that exists. Like, obviously there's a ton of stuff out there like that. So it's not like I'm like, where could this fit in this like niche, whatever. But I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I doubt that movie even did. Maybe it did great. I don't remember. If
it's also a time, you remember like in the Scooby-Doo episode, we were kind of talking about like, oh, well, they couldn't really make Scooby-Doo like this. There's like times and places for things. So I find that sometimes it's not great to, like, the things you love that make you aren't necessarily the best point of reference for making something for the future in a way, Because I have that same problem.
Like, I think that movie couldn't come out today. And I know that. And I think it's like, it's not what I would want to make, but it's the closest thing I can think of in terms of like, oh, this is like weirdly adult.
Yeah.
But, but it's still like child appropriate.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Right. I think maybe, what would change about it? I think if we're talking like big mainstream stuff that's like has mass appeal, I think the characters would be a little less archetypical. They would be a little more representative of like very specific, more specific types of people. I think that's like such a big important thing for storytelling for like young readers and like young audiences these days, right? Like a type of person a character is more important than their role in the story in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, I think sense of identity has become like such a bigger topic. And this is, again, me speaking to like my experience with the market, where for me, making graphic novels in this sort of like very popular right now middle grade market that goes into YA a little bit, this is like a really big growing market. I feel like that's why I got lucky enough to enter into it, because there's a lot of space.
And talent.
Yeah, there is a lot of talent there. Stories of contemporary young people about friendships and emotions and relationships is like top what editors seem to like want to make, which is different. Whereas like Rats of Nim is about other themes more than, you know what I mean?
Definitely thematically, it's like not the same as what I'm envisioning. I think it's more, I don't know.
It has like social themes. It has environmental themes that are present in modern stuff, but it's like the characters, like Miss Frisbee is very much a character, but pretty much everybody else is like someone just supporting like what the story is about.
Yeah. Well, and even then, like Miss Frisbee, I mean, by no means am I criticizing it really, but like she's like an adult wife, like very specific demographic type of person that is not like, oh, I'm a child and I can project myself into this situation. Like, it's not that.
Yeah.
So
exactly. See, like
it's an interesting approach that I don't think we really do so much today.
Like if you were to try to, whatever, let's say you're writing a pitch for your graphic novel, you probably want to start with like young so-and-so's, like some, you're putting them in the point of view of like a young protagonist. If you're like, my story begins with an adult mom. She's had 5 children and it's a really rough day. And, like the premise of Rats of Nim doesn't sell to a modern editor because it's like, okay, they're just going to default be like, a kid doesn't want to read about like a mom.
Yeah.
And I've had this, like, I want to tell more like stories about kids and their parents' relationships. Like my early drafts of anything are always the parents play a bigger role because I think that's what kids think about. But that stuff always gets batted down and pushed back. And this is a case of like working with an editor, which might not necessarily apply, if you're like just working on a story.
Well, and that's another thing that
your characters can be whoever you want.
Yeah, I kind of mentioned this up front, sort of where this is my pipe dream for me alone.
Yeah,
and I'm not really personally thinking about it from that angle, but I'm not like shutting it out either. So I think it's helpful to talk about it from the perspective of somebody who maybe would want to get something published. I don't know if somebody wants to publish my shit. Contact me. That's great. Wonderful. Let's work together. But like, that's like me getting too ahead of myself. Like, I don't know how that stuff works. I don't even know if I want that. So
okay, then I went too far on that.
I don't think so. I think do speak to that. It's just like, for me, I'm still wrapping my head around everything, but I think it's helpful to know. And that's why I asked, because like you can spin your own wheels so hard. I think it makes things easier in some ways to have somebody that you can show your draft to and they're like, no, for these reasons. Yeah. Like that makes so much sense to me. So it's just like a little bit of an unfamiliar way for me to think about working because I don't have that. So I'm like, it's just not a concrete visualization for me, but it's interesting because it clearly affects the output. Yeah,
totally. I mean, some people like really prosper with just, they have their space and time that they work in and they tell the story and it flows and it is whatever it becomes and they have a fan base and people love it. And then and it works. Like for me personally, I never really found a fan base independently of publishing. So I kept trying to tell stories that fit what I thought I wanted to make, then skewing them a bit more to what I thought my strengths were, and then skewing a bit more towards a market. And, at 40 years old, here I am. I'm like in this very specific little box that I think I'm lucky enough that it works really well. But that's kind of why I talk like that. I think why I'm like, what do you think your market is? It's not like because I want to be like an industrialist and like put everything in a little box. But for me, I prosper in my artistic voice comes out better now that it's like kind of refined to something a little bit, So asking those questions can be useful for that, just to put like some borders around it.
I think it does. I mean, that's the whole kind of, if you had to subtitle this, it would be like, how do I put myself in a box such that I can work without suffocating to death?
Yeah.
A box with holes.
Yeah.
A new podcast.
Ooh, I have a question now. We're about to kind of maybe get into like sketching or like storyboarding a little bit.
Yes.
Like what you have a broad range of styles you're like very skilled in. Like, do you have an idea of how you would want to draw this?
Yes. And no, and no.
Well, yeah.
But yes, I do have sort of specific images in mind. I don't know that I even have like reference material of like other people's work that I could draw on, but like there's definitely, I've seen stuff that is in the same vein as what I'm picturing. I have like a bunch of drawings of, what I would presume would be like characters from this.
Okay.
That kind of thing. It's not like, I don't have like a rendered panel or whatever it might look like. It's not that far, but I do have an idea.
So is it like loose and cartoony and like a kid-friendly animation way? Or because you also draw like in a more like nature illustration, like a reference book. Like you can do that too. So I don't actually...
Fancy pictures.
Yeah, so I don't know where on that spectrum you're even...
Well, see, I wanted to ask you about that, so I'm not trying to... answer a question with a question again exclusively, but I was wondering like what goes into figuring that out, because in my mind, if I just like manifested this book, which would be so amazing if it was just like bow, done, didn't happen. It is more cartoony. This isn't a good reference exactly, but at least in terms of like line work maybe and complexity, like Adventure Time or something. Like just like not like line weight. No, throw that in the garbage. Like, don't worry about that. Very like shapes and like color driven a little bit more, and not so much like these beautiful like berserk, gorgeous rendered, like I died drawing this, like type things. Yeah. Although that would be cool. And I'm like, how do you resist the temptation to like overshoot also when you're like, okay, this establishing shot, it needs to be like super badass and amazing. Like, how do you not just sit there for the next 15 years? Or more realistically for me, sit there for a couple weeks and then wander away and never come back to it again.
Yeah. Like you have 3 amazing pages and then that's
it. And you're like, I'm tired now forever. Like I'm done.
Well, I think it speaks to that idea of like a graphic novel can be a marathon, but they don't have to be drawn in any specific way, right? Like there's the idea of, treat your readers with respect, imply things like don't over explain everything. You can definitely say that with drawing. Like, I think there's like a rule of thumb with certain types of like manga that are like, there's only one establishing shot per 2 pages or per spread or something. Like people do have hard and fast rules about how much literal drawing is on a page if you're doing it for a living. Like, I think for me, I draw more than some, but a lot less than others. But my stuff is very cartoonish, not in quite Adventure Time, but like shows that would have been on in that era as well. Like characters have very expressive faces. Their bodies are a little bit more simplified, but very representative of actual humans with like body mass and body types. And then the backgrounds usually have enough detail where you can see where they're standing in context. There's lighting effects. I draw weather. I draw wear on objects. Like I make things look aged. All that stuff is important in my storytelling, but it might not be for somebody else. Like another artist might be like, look, my story is more atmospheric. My characters don't necessarily look different from each other because they just represent emotions and moods and relationships. It's okay if you can't like tell them apart in like a long shot. And then maybe my backgrounds are more kind of like cloudy shapes with an impression of a tree. And I only use one color and it's blue. Like that stuff doesn't work for middle grade. That's why I kind of bring up the idea of who your audience is, because in the market, stuff that is a little more minimal and feels like has a lighter touch, a more like artistic, impressionistic feel, goes into more of an adult category. But like kid stuff kind of looks like a cartoonist who might work on an animated show made a graphic novel, which is like often the case. A lot of times it's those same people that like storyboard for a series, right? Like Owl House. And then they like make a graphic novel every 3 years, That
seems cool.
Yeah. It's probably a cool job.
We should probably reach out to some of those people.
Yeah, we can talk to some of them. I got some on a list.
Okay, cool.
We'll get there.
Business.
Yeah.
Excellent.
But like deciding, simple is fine. Like don't overdraw. I think with graphic novels is very important.
Yeah, I think that's the hard, like restraint.
Yeah.
Not overdoing it is probably, it's the same thing as just being like, I want to make a feature film and my own it's just like the natural instinct to go really big when you totally shouldn't.
And I feel like you have the tool, you have the point of view to understand that because of your work with animation. Like, what it means to like add one extra detail and then have to deal with it over the next 8 months, right? If you put a watch on a character,
that's awesome.
You better be ready to draw that watch for, 200 pages, right?
Cool. Well, I'm going to have to think about this. And you did bring up something else that I wanted to talk about. I guess I don't really have specific questions about this, but do you like hard and fast rules about, how many of XYZ type drawing do I have inside of so many pages? Like, okay. I'm just kind of wondering if you're writing a whole book.
Yeah.
So you've got the story written. That's great. But then how do you be like, okay, this part I'm going to go like way out bird's eye view of like the whole town. And then like, I don't know, in this part of the story, it's 2 people talking. That makes sense. Like we're in the room that they're talking, whatever. I don't know, just like, how do you decide what is shown and when?
Okay. Yeah. Good questions. Well, I guess we're calling this episode like making comics. So we might as well like reference
a box with holes.
Making
making comics.
Okay, so like there's realms of choice is how I always frame it, like in any given moment. So let's call a moment in a comic like two panels, because that's truly what a comic is. Like you can have a comic that's 1 panel, but you can't really have a discussion about comics unless there's 2 panels, because it shows a progression of time. So like in Understanding Comics, Scott McCloud kind of breaks it down into like 7 categories. And if you understand those categories in a general way, and it's not like that book is the answer to everything, but it's a good point of reference. So if you understand these 7 categories and then you look at graphic novels, you can actually start to study how artists like pace those things. So like his breakdown of those 7 types of transitions from one panel to another. First one is moment to moment, which is like represented as a character about to trip on a rock, and then they are tripping on a rock. So the passage of time, very brief, no room for imagination really, you're seeing everything. So that's a rare type of transition in a comic because you wouldn't really give somebody that much information on a regular basis because like they're going to be able to connect the dots and with bigger, broader steps. So you see moments to moments when something's like very important and playing out, you know, very particularly. Beyond that, you have like the action to action transition, which is like characters about to trip on the rock. Next panel, they're on the ground. Your brain can put together what happened. And it's maybe funnier if you don't show it. And so action to action is like the most common example. So if you look at like an X-Men comic, most of it is like action beat to action beat. Characters like in a dramatic moment, whether dialogue or fighting, next beat is like the next dramatic moment. If someone was writing maybe like a different type of story, you might not have as many action to actions. Like let's say you're doing something that covers a long expanse of time. You might have more like scene to scene where it's like a bigger sense of where we are and when. So then you would zoom out. So it does come down to like any given moment. This is a hard question to answer. I'm trying to do my best.
I think you're doing great. And it's really convenient that I was reading just these Scott McCloud books recently. Yeah. So I'm like, yeah, I heard of those.
Yeah. I think when you see enough movies and you read enough comics, I feel like some of it just starts to happen and you just have to start drawing and you might not nail it the first time. And that's why thumbnail sketching is so important. You'd be like, all right, page 1 opens with this. I got a cool close-up of someone like taking a test. And then later you come back, you're like, oh, you know what? It's probably better to show that they're at school and it's the morning because later it is important that we know the name of the school already. So then you like bump out that panel and then you throw in your new like establishing shot. So it's not like you know right away. The trick is to draw simply so you can like make adjustments fast, I guess.
That's a great answer.
Like I do a lot of zooming in. Like I often will frame a shot like a character having a big expression. And then later I usually try to like zoom in more to really push that home. So you do a lot of answering that question a million times. Like what's the right framing for this shot to give the right information at the right time? And again, that's why it would be helpful to like sketch out a scene first because you'll just get in the habit of asking that question constantly.
This is just
it'll make your story stronger.
Specific question. Like how many times, is there a situation where you drew the same thing over and over and over again trying to make it work? Or does that you're like, fuck, this like sucks that I'm doing this like 70 times to get it right. But I'm like, it's not right.
I do things at an embarrassingly, you were talking earlier about like creative projects we work on. You can see how many times I'll like work through an idea till I feel it's right. And I can tell at times you're like, I think it was time to move on about 8 steps ago. But everybody's got their own like, hole they want to dig to get to the thing, right? So I definitely do redraw like an eyebrow a bunch of times. With my book Spirit Week, I was like probably way more than I needed to be committed to redrawing angles of the Shining Hotel. That most people wouldn't even know why I was choosing that.
I can see why that would be fun, though.
But also, like, maybe more work than I should have done. Like, it might not be a good example of, like, people should make books like this,
Yeah.
I think there's very few books, actually, that are examples. The things that are cool, I think, usually are like, well, that's cool, but you probably shouldn't try to do it that way. That's why it has to be, like, the passion. Like, you have to want to tell your story because however you get there is going to be some weird fucked up way.
Oh, yeah, probably. Fuck. That's true.
I feel like you actually know the answers to more of these questions than you think because when I watch your animated work, I'm like, oh, Caitlin knows how to put a camera at the right place at the right time. I think maybe what you're struggling is how does that become a page?
Yes, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, and that's it. Like, I was going to say, I'm asking about the thought process behind this because to me, I get how it's intuitive and I get the iterative process. Well, so I'm not even, that's almost why I'm like, shouldn't I be thinking about this harder? Not that I'm doing it right now actively or anything. But let's say, like, if I sat down to just, like, do a page, whatever, like, I could crank stuff out.
Yeah.
Because I can see it. Like, I can speculate on what it should be, even if I don't have it written out, which I don't.
Yeah.
So there is that. But then I'm like, well, what if it's wrong? Like, that's the problem. And not just like, oh, what if it's wrong? Like, oh, it's going to be bad or whatever. It's just like, it's that writer's block thing.
Yeah.
Where am I like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
Because I really need to feel like I know what I'm doing before I can feel like I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Which
I think the wrong thing comes from you don't know like what your story is saying, because readers will usually want to put it together. Like, you obviously have all the skills needed to tell a story. And if it's coming out wrong, it's because you don't know how to answer a question you have for yourself. Because odds are I could look at it and be like, this is cool. I wonder where it's going. You're like, I don't have an answer for, you know, like that's usually more of the case, right? Yeah, I don't know. Well, what's the next?
We're swinging back to story stuff.
Okay, yeah.
I wanted to ask the comic relief question. No pun intended. Comic relief. I don't know why I'm looking over here to the audience that isn't here.
Oh, I like that. Is they're to the left?
This is okay.
Yeah. Right.
This is a question I've just always wanted to ask any comics person, and it might be a really stupid question. It has nothing to do with anything we've been talking about, really. Why in comics do they always write the dialogue and the captions and stuff so that this word is bolded and so is this one? Like, why is that? I find it very confusing, actually, and distracting. But I'm like, there has to be a reason, because every comic ever does that. They'll just make, he walked down to the store. And I'm like, am I supposed to read it that way? Because I do every time.
I guess I know what you're talking about, but does every comic do that? Like
I've never seen anyone talk about it.
Yeah,
ever.
yeah.
So I feel like I'm the only person in the world who's like, what? But like, I was reading Making Comics by Scott McCloud recently, and I noticed it.
Totally. Okay, I know. Yeah.
And it's like, so it's not, he didn't invent it by any means. It's a kind of a comics like trope that you see in a lot of stuff. But that brought it to the forefront of my mind, and I was just like, why is this so common? Is it purely for like, I want this word to stick in your mind as you've moved on?
Yeah, it's like an element of style of a very specific era and type of comic. Like if you go back and read a lot of like pulpy comics way back in the day, like if you picked up an old Captain America or like a Tales from the Crypt, that's way more prominent, like the emphasis on certain things and energies. But I feel like people, like I don't do that.
Okay, I was going to say, I haven't really noticed it in your books.
Yeah, I think it's kind of falls away in certain categories. I think superhero comics like Marvel and DC, I think it's still part of like house style.
Yeah.
Because different publishers do have that. Like the publisher I'm working with, they really want to use M dashes in certain occasions where I'm like, oh, I'd rather have an ellipse there or a comma or something.
Oh, I love M dashes.
Yeah, so it's like, and then that rule is there, so I have to abide by it. So I know like understanding comics is like kind of more of an independent project. But when you look at Marvel and DC, I think it's part of the typography of the house. But it's not a rule. Like you definitely don't have to do that. So much
better of an answer than I was expecting. Where I was just like,
No, you don't have to. You definitely don't have to do it. I think there's probably less rules than you think. I think it's like you're on your way to a party that you're definitely invited to, and you think people are going to like judge the choices.
What? That's never happened. Honestly, that one was out of curiosity because I was like, I don't like this, and I wouldn't do it. No offense to the people that do it out there.
But think about people that do their writing. They write by hand. Like that doesn't. They don't use that.
But maybe they do. Maybe they go over and they're like, this word is I don't know.
I guess we could pull some books from the shelf and like go over it.
I mean, that would be great. I don't think that would make good audio content.
It might be 50-50 actually. Like I'm not seeing it as much as you, but I bet it's there more than I'm seeing.
Hopefully now it doesn't like you're not like it's everywhere. Like sorry in advance if I ruined everybody's graphic novel experience. I don't know. I feel like other people don't see it because I'm just like neurotically paying attention to that kind of thing.
No, well, especially if you are trying to like figure out how to do it. Like, why wouldn't you see it?
So now I'm regretting asking that question because I had a follow up to what we were talking about before, and it's gone now.
Let's ask the audience if they remember. No, just
pipe in the cricket sounds, or just edit in an audience question. That'd be great.
A car squeals to a stop outside, and someone
drives into a plate glass window. So writing, okay. I'm throwing this out as a concrete thing that I have thought about doing vaguely. What if a graphic novel, that's what I want to do. I'm going to write a whole thing. It's like a book. I don't know how long necessarily, whatever, but I have like the outline of a story. It is not filled in by any means. It's just like the broadest strokes.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to break that down into something more manageable, what would you do?
Yeah. Okay. So like, I made a class about pitching graphic novels where I kind of like broke down, I guess, this exact process. It's on Skillshare if anybody wants to watch it. Or you could email me and I guess I could send you the unlisted like YouTube link.
Ooh,
and you can
wink.
just watch it for free.
Skillshare, if you're listening to this, don't.
Oh, yeah, no, don't.
Hang up.
Yeah. But anyway, so I kind of have thought a lot about this because I think that's a very particular important question. It's like, how do I refine it enough where it can actually become a thing? So let's say you've got like your general sense of what your story is. So for example, my book, Shark Summer, the pitch for it, which was given to an editor who already liked my work and was looking for an idea. So I didn't really have to sell them on, can I accomplish it? They already believed I could. So they're like, well, what's your just general idea? You don't have to draw really anything. Just give me an idea that's going to entice me and make me want to read your story. So
no pressure.
The pitch for Shark Summer was basically like a sense of time and place with a broad sense of like what the characters were going to be. So this might be a place where you're at in some degree with yours. Maybe it's a stronger sense of character or place. But I was like, it's the summer of 1974, island of Martha's Vineyard. Jaws is being filmed on the island. The cast, that's very specific. It's like actually happened. There's a lot of documentation of it. I'm going to explore that. That's my promise. And then the characters were like, well, there's a girl. She wants to make a movie because there's like a prize for some money because she wants to like help her mom. That sounds nice. And then she's going to have some friends that are going to help her along the way. So I knew very specifically where and when my story was. And I had a general sense of like a character with a motivation and they're going to have friends. And my editor believed that would work because if I put those characters in that situation, they would naturally do something interesting. So that's the best version of, for me, an overview. Like maybe you have like a story about a character relationship. It's like a girl from this part of town, a girl from this part of town. What happens when they meet at the coffee shop? Who knows what that coffee shop's like, but here's more about those girls. Like that could be a pitch. And now what do you do from there? Okay, you've got your general, you with me?
Yeah.
Okay. I just need
I am asleep.
To say something.
Nope.
I told you I was going to get very self-conscious, but I feel like this is all for the greater good, right?
No, I'm going to use this for evil. Wow, you're really fucked up. So bad shit's going to go down now.
All right, so we have the most broad of plot synopsises. Now you have to kind of answer some questions like, what type of story are you telling? What's the structure of it? Like, is this a romantic story? Is this like a kid's adventure? Is this, if it's for a little older reader, is it like romantic on a deeper emotional level? Or is it a little more kid-friendly pizza party? Like, once you start to know like the tone and vibe of your story, then you can start breaking down your plot. It's like, well, all right, we have the summer. Where do we start? Well, we got to introduce our main character. And now I start to take that like one paragraph synopsis and break it into like, 10 paragraphs where I'm talking to myself and my editor in a very casual but very specific beats of a story. So it's like, we meet Gail. She is a girl of this age. Her hair is kind of grown out and really messy. She's wearing a stretched out old sports jersey from her sports team in Boston. And she's talking to her mom, who's about to go on an audition for this movie called Jaws that's being filmed this summer.
Ever heard of it?
Yeah. So like you start to hint at some details. We learn characters, what they want, what they need, context for them. And then you just start going paragraph by paragraph. I find that I write really broad paragraphs and I get through a couple before I have to go back and be like, oh, I answered this question. Now I have to go back and kind of tighten up this. The problem is you might get stuck in a loop where you never get past a point.
Yeah.
But ideally,
concerning.
You can keep writing, try to get through the beginning, middle, and end of your story. And then as you want, go back, stretch out some of those paragraphs, edit out some other ones. And at the end of that, you should have a synopsis that maybe is, if your book, let's say your book is like 300 pages long, like mine, which sounds long, but it's not. That's like kind of a standard length. That document is like maybe 10 pages of text. And that's enough information for me to start actually like writing some dialogue and being hyper specific of what might go in a panel, what reference images I'm going to need, like what settings we're at. And then from there, the story like starts to tell itself even more, because I'm like, ooh, if they're here this time of day, that actually changes the whole mood of it. Or if this is at a cafe where a band is playing, it's different than if they meet in the street. Like you start to make those kind of scenes from your synopsis. And then you just get more smaller and smaller. And hopefully you don't have to go back to that earlier document and be like, oh, whoops, my story's not about the summer of 1974 anymore, or a girl that wants to help her mom. Like, you need all these documents to remind you what your story was about, because like you do forget. Like I don't even know what we're talking about right now. That's how often I forget.
Then I'm asleep.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? Like you need to write a lot, like an embarrassing amount. You have to take an embarrassing amount of notes, because you will forget what you're trying to do.
Okay,
it
so
won't
how
just
do you
all be natural in your head.
How do you remember? I know you're saying that now, but like, how do you remember then? If you're like making it and then you're like, wait, what? Like, what do you look at then to remember?
Well, I have my short synopsis, which reminds me of like what the book is about. If I was to hand it to a really impatient 8-year-old, I'm like, it's about,
here's 10 pages.
It's about a movie. It's about kids making a movie during the summer Jaws is being filmed, and they find out some weird stuff about an island. Done. Like, in and out. That's like just enough. I need to remember that first and foremost. Then that like 20 or 10 page document, that becomes like all my big points. So when I start to thumbnail or sketch, I can always look back and be like, oh yeah, what is that first scene about? And, call them chapters or call them scenes. Come up with some sort of breakdown of like sectioning for your book, even if it doesn't appear in the final thing. Like my books are usually like 4 acts, I've decided. That's just sort of like...
Try and stop me.
Yeah, don't you dare tell me they're 3.
But it's interesting you say that, because I was going to say the same thing. Like I do, once it gets to the end, I'm kind of like, I don't know what happens yet. I don't know how this resolves. I don't even know what the central problem is. We could talk about that later off the air, because I don't know.
Yeah.
But like, then I'll circle back to the beginning parts, and like, I feel like developing that is helping.
Yeah.
But I just like feel like it's naturally broken up into like 3 or 4 sections to me. So that's why I asked too, thinking like, you could just make the first one. It could be like a serial, Say that, serial? It could be serialized, as one has done in the past. I don't know. So that's just like an idea that I had, and I haven't done anything with it. But viable?
A character, I think you really just have to, I think fundamentally you have to have a character that wants something. And then that will really decide a lot for yourself. Like when I say I have this character, Gail, she wants to make money, but she really wants to help her mom. So then that becomes what the story is about. It's like kind of about this girl aspiring to like be a good daughter. And then you have to show that she can make good choices along the way by making some bad choices along the way, right? Like they have to learn. And
cool.
Yeah, you put those hurdles in there, and then that becomes what the story is. But unless you know that it's about a girl trying to help her mom, you can't make the right maze for them or add the right like cool scenes, because you don't really know why they would want to get through that scene.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that becomes like how you craft the story, is because you have your character that wants to get somewhere, and you have to make it interesting to get there. So do you think, like maybe you're not ready to answer that, but once you start to, even in a broad way, have a general sense of like, they need $80 for this, like something superficial.
Yeah.
It would grow naturally once you start to explore it. But like, you just need like they want to like get to the school dance. I don't know why, but that's a starting point. There just has to be a desire in it, Like think of the characters you love.
Yeah. Miss Frisbee. My number one
Well, what does she
hero.
want? She wants to like say she has to have
her dying child, I think.
Yeah.
In her whole house. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think you add the dying child because that's very specific. But then like there's the bigger sense of like the house and the land and helping those rats. Like, But there is usually like saving a kid, like so generic. But it's such a good story that comes of it because of the world building and stuff that comes up around it. So you're probably, in conclusion to that thought, is I bet you're overthinking what you think you need to know.
No, that's stupid. Thanks for your time. I don't think I have any more questions. I thought maybe I would, but I don't really. I feel like that's touched on everything. Some of this is like writing.
Yeah.
Done it. Art. Talked about it. Length. Great. I don't know. Are there any like Ira's thoughts for young people in the world today doing art stuff, big stuff?
I think comics are very cool, and I think everybody should make one. I've learned so much about the world through comics. I feel like I've talked a little bit about it on the show, but I've read some superhero comics, some mainstream stuff, but I was always really lucky to like find independent artists. Like so many of them, did their own weird thing. They got popular enough where it like made it to my small town. There were stories that were just unlike anything I'd ever seen, like Jeff Smith's Bone. I don't know if I've talked about that on the show. It's like a cartoon fantasy story, the sort of Lord of the Rings-ish. But the guy was an animator. He quit that job and he's like, you know what? Instead of like making a Disney cartoon or wherever he was working, he's like, I'm going to do my own Disney cartoon.
Wow, you did it first.
Yeah.
Hero.
But you know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
I feel like it's a scenario like you're in where you're like, well, I can put all my skills to use for other people telling their stories, or I can take all the things I've learned from working with those people and now like make my own thing, right? Like that was always the lesson. It wasn't about getting a job inking or drawing Wolverine or like Spider-Man. I never aspired to like draw somebody else's character. I just wanted to like be part of the community of people that told their own stories. So that's like where I begin with comics. So that's why I'm always like, oh, anybody can make them and anybody should. And like, you're going to make something weird and cool. And it's going to like possibly like change what cartooning is.
Yeah.
Because some of them have, like Nimona changed what graphic novels was, like Smile did, like understanding comics is like such a weird thing. It's like a guy with no pupils, like telling you how to make comics, like just rambling on and on for like hundreds of pages.
And
about,
we love
like,
it.
The structure. Right. Because it's such its own weird little thing. I don't know. Graphic novels are just kind of cool and they can be anything. And people will put them out. Like look around, like there's so much weird shit like that's on a bookshelf in Barnes and Noble. And that's cool.
That is exciting.
You know?
I'm interested in that.
Because I feel like when we talk about animated films, sometimes we're like, oh, another one of these or another thing along this line. You have all those resources and that's the story you tell. Like a comic is so much more just a person putting their pencil to paper. It's so much more pure than like something that might happen with an animated film that's like revised and rewritten and moving through so many lines of production where it loses something, right?
Well, I got one recently. I don't know if we're in the hour of just like talking about our personal stuff now, but and just like I was buying all these books and I bought one from this independent publisher that's closing that I didn't know about before. I think it's called Piao. They're really fucking cool. Mm-hmm. R.I.P. Because I like came to the party so late, and it's like one of the only books I'll ever have from there because they're not. I think after like at the end of 2022, they were like, "We're just done. We're just not doing this anymore."
Yeah.
But they published this person. Linnea Sturt, I think is the name, and it's called Ages of Rot, and it's fucking amazing. Mm-hmm. And it's like it's not for kids. I mean, it's very weird and. It's not non-narrative. It's just like unorthodox. I don't even know. It's not dialogue driven or like character driven either. There's a lot of like weird sci-fi. It kind of reminds me of Fantastic Planet.
Okay.
A little bit.
Yeah.
But I was just like, oh, I like this. I haven't seen anything like it in a long time.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of like how I've been feeling lately, I think. Like I'm a little tired of animation. Cartoon feelings here to stay.
Yeah.
It's just like, I think.
The day-to-day of.
Yeah. And like where I am at. In perspective of animation, it's just like things are a little slow lately, maybe. And my personal ambitions just like aren't really there anymore.
Yeah.
They're just like, I love it as an art form. I think it's great. And I just like, I don't really care if I'm involved or not, which is not how I used to feel. Mm-hmm. So just a changing perspective. But it does seem like, oh, there's all this exciting shit happening in graphic novels that I just like totally didn't see at all until recently.
Yeah, I think it's easy to miss it. I mean, like anything, right? Like there's just so many cool things in every medium. Like I just have been always attuned to graphic novels, especially I need to actually go read more indie new stuff, because when in my 20s and 30s, definitely my 20s, I was like reading a lot of weird stuff, like weird little books with like screen printed covers and like strange little books, just like all kinds of strange stuff I can't even explain. I'll show you some of them someday. But it just is very inspiring, and it just proves that like there's not as many rules as you thought when you were growing up and you were only exposed to like X, Y, and Z of something, like something that I often think about with the distinction between like comics and kind of animation is it's like, how much do you really love the grind of exploring technology? Because to me, I feel like I hit a wall with it, where I've said this on the show before, where it's like all that stuff I learned in that program, it's totally irrelevant anymore. Like I want my knowledge to feel like it's accruing in a way where it's always somehow relevant. And I feel like sometimes with tech stuff, I'll be like, oh, I don't even need to know that anymore, because it's like summarized in this new tool or whatever. In comics, the day-to-day of it is so much more about like, how do I draw this? What are these words? Where does it go on the page? And that's it. Whereas like animation or like a field motion graphics, you seem to spend so much more time not dealing with those cool story things, but it's like, am I exporting this file right? Like,
yeah, it sucks. That's so true.
It's like comics, you usually can figure that out like pretty quickly. It's like, okay, Adobe Acrobat's going to do that, and 300 DPI, RGB 1998. Okay, done and exported. Yeah. And you never need to learn anything more.
The sad reality is like, a lot of those creative decisions that I made are like economically driven, not
right.
creatively driven. And now I'm like, that sucks. And it's been great, honestly, in a lot of ways. It's not like I regret it, but it's like, it is like, I really wish I could have just been doing what I want to do.
Yeah.
Instead, and like developing other skills than that.
I think comics will it will like release some things in your mind that are probably like stuck in there because you don't have an outlet. Because like you draw,
there's no holes in the box.
Because they're just a different thing. Like when you draw, like some of the stuff you draw sometimes, like nothing wrong with it, obviously, but it's not doing what comics can do. Like there's something with comics in that process of telling a story and speech bubbles and character stuff, like that really only operates like in a very specific part of your brain. I think you will have a lot of fun being there. Well, that's all for now. You can check out our episode archive and other facts at cartoonfeelings.com. Tweet at us or join us on Instagram, and you'll find both of those at Feeling Cartoons. And thanks to our producer, Josh Romeo, for making it sound so nice.
Thank you, Josh. And if you, listener, are enjoying the podcast, consider taking the time to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Talked about it earlier. Probably read it if it's nice. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And if you like this, we talk more about stuff like this on our Patreon. Just every little bit helps. Keeps the website going. Keeps the podcast going, etc. So, and you get cool episodes of stuff. It's like movie commentaries, talking about graphic novels, etc.
Puppet shows.
There's puppet shows.
No, just throwing you.
We should do a puppet show.
Okay.
So we're doing that. Maybe. I mean, check to see if it's there. If that's what you're looking for. I don't know. Thanks so much. Bye.